pre-show here so everyone can see us right now. Just doing like an audio check for myself too, because my personal audio tends to be loud. Okay. Um, yeah, so how has your Thursday been so far?
Busy. Yeah, I mean, I
Busy.
guess like everyone else in the world, but yeah, it's been kind of busy. Um, I launched a big new program this morning, actually, with some
Ooh.
nonprofit executives in South Carolina, which is great, about 80 people, and then yeah, doing some work on the COVID relief response to make sure that it's more equitable, working with the government. So we're in the hands of some good people in government, actually, uh, not just because of the new administration, but people that are really focused on equity issues. So long day, but good work.
I
Yeah,
mean, that sounds like a really just productive and successful day. Definitely.
yeah.
Mhm.
It's a blessing to be able to do this kind of work.
Yeah. Are they involved in like the vaccine distribution or like what's kind of the overarching work
Yeah,
there?
yeah. They're kind of at the front lines of the COVID. The 100 million in 100 days. They're at the front lines of that, particularly on primary care, and they, it's one thing just to get money out the door. It's not easy, but that's it doesn't address issues of equity.
Yeah.
You could get two times money out the door and create two times more the inequity. So I think that's what really gives me a lot of hope is that people are asking really good questions right now and not just doing the easy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, with everything that's been going on, I definitely have noticed a lot more people are paying quite a bit more attention than usual. Um, Especially, I mean, kind of what we were just talking about a moment ago, of what with the stock market and just people jumping all right into things.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a different kind of awareness. Yeah,
Yeah. It's kind of like what happens when you have a bunch of people that are struggling. Like, they're gonna figure something out, hopefully.
yeah. You know, and it's painful to see people struggle. Um, no one should have to struggle,
Mhm.
but shame on those who see the struggle and don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're a lot to be thankful for, despite all the heartache.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. And so we're approaching the minute away from showtime, so I'm going to go ahead and transition us over into the actual episode, and we'll be right back. Hi, I'm Kayla Hathaway, a partner here at Simpatico Studios. Simpatico is a platform dedicated to cultivating conversations and actions on complex social issues with professionals all around the world. On the Climate EDU channel, I interview academics about university programs, careers, research, internships, and published literature like books and papers. If you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now, on to today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Climate EDU. I am your host, Kayla Hathaway, and today I'm once again rejoined by Eric Martin, the Managing Director of Adaptive Change Advisors, an organization that seeks to democratize leadership, making it possible for anyone, anywhere to improve their livelihood by more effectively mobilizing people in their organizations, communities, and in their own lives. Today, Eric addresses political thinking, the 6 key relationships one needs to consider when taking leadership action, and the steps of engaging in a leadership moment. He also introduces us to Kennetha, an LGBTQ rights activist who brought people with different views together to support her efforts to make her organization inclusive. Eric, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good
And
to
for
see you again, Kayla.
yes, it's wonderful seeing you as always. And for those who may be joining us for the first time, would you mind giving us just a brief overview for the book and what it's about?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you. So the book, Your Leadership Moment, is the name of the book. The subtitle is Democratizing Leadership in an Age of Authoritarianism, which we've had a lot of recently. So it's premised on a very simple idea, which is that we each face 5 leadership moments every day. And so the question that really drives my work is, would you recognize a leadership moment when it comes your way, and would you know what to do when it did? So that's really what the book is about. And I tell the stories of 3 really extraordinarily ordinary people who are leading consequential change from where they sit. We talked about 2 of them in previous episodes, and also interweave some of my experience, and which I try not to be too gratuitous about. But I find that when it comes to leadership, for me, this book and the work that I do around leadership development, it's about opening hearts, not just teaching minds. So we need to tell the truth, and some of that truth is really gritty and hard, particularly when it comes to issues of race and things of that sort. Growing up in the city of Detroit, as I did, racism was and still is rampant, and so being honest about that in myself and my family is a part of the book's story as well. So it was. I don't want to say it took leadership to write the book. That might be too self-gratuitous, but I definitely was concerned about disappointing some people, my own people, which you and I talked about in the last episode. So anyway, that's the book, and it's been out since October. And again, I don't think it could come out at a better time.
No, definitely, especially with everything that's been going on in the world, this is a perfect book for this moment, I feel, absolutely. And to dive into part 5, if you can go ahead and elaborate just a little bit on the title of this part being whose leadership work is it? And why you chose this for this part, and what it means.
Yeah. Well, there's really 4 questions that guide the way I think about leadership development, and actually any time someone's trying to engage in leadership, in an act of leadership, that is. In the first question, I'll come to your question in a second, but the first question is what is the work? What is the work of leadership? We talked about the distinction in a prior episode about technical work and adaptive work. That is, work that problems that have easy answers or known answers, and some those that don't. So that's the first. What is the real work of leadership? It's not just about having answers and vision and charisma, all those good things. The second question is around, okay, if I understand what's required to actually make progress, to lead consequential change, what is my choice? What is my leadership moment? And we talked a bit about that and the difference between leadership and authority. So the third question we're coming to here is really, so whose work is it? And when it comes to leadership, particularly adaptive leadership, which is a framework that I work with, you can never lead alone. It's actually dangerous and risky to lead alone. So the question, whose work is it, is really about, who do I need to be making the changes with? And, you don't change people in leadership, you change with them. There's a really wonderful quote that I use a lot from, it's actually a thousands of year old quote from a guy named Hillel the Elder. He was a rabbi. And what he said was, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but he said, you have to, when you think about leadership and change, you have to ask yourself, who am I in this change? What is the work? And when is the right time to act? And so I think I'll pull the quote out later. It slipped my mind right now, but that's kind of the essence of this. And again, these ideas are age old, Kayla. What I'm really teaching and bringing to people, there's some new ideas, but I think a lot of this question around how do we lead change, be it an exodus from Egypt 2000s of years ago to leading a company like, say, Patagonia, who's trying to, as they say, save our home planet. That's their new mission. These are big, bold questions that have no easy answers. So we can't do that alone. And that's what really whose work is trying to address.
Mm-hmm. And on the topic of not being able to do this kind of work alone, in part 5 of the book, you mentioned 6 key relationships. And I was hoping you could elaborate on those and why they matter in leadership work.
Yeah. So there's, it's really helpful to begin to kind of diagnose these different groups or factions or subgroups that tend to coalesce around these adaptive challenges. That was a lot of jargon I just threw away. But in other words, when we're trying to mobilize people, they tend to have very typical reactions to engaging in change that's going to require something significant from them, not just kind of nodding their head and throwing a few bones your way. So the first group that we think about, that many people think about, is the group that is authority, that has authority. This is your boss, your supervisor, the mayor of a town, perhaps, the CEO, the people, who we typically call leaders, actually. And what they do often has nothing to do with leadership. It's about authority. And as we talked about in a prior episode, the pressure on authority to deliver on the status quo is immense, and that's why they often don't lead. So we need to understand that pressure. We talked about direction, order, protection, expertise, right? The second group is are the allies or the partners, and these are a little bit different. The best way I could describe the difference between allies and partners is, if you woke up in jail on a Saturday morning, the allies are the ones that you could call and get the bail money. No questions asked. They give you the bail money and you can go home. The partners are the ones who would wake up in jail next to you, and you turn your head over and say, "What the hell happened?" So they're in it with you. They've taken a risk with you, and if you kind of don't distinguish between partners and allies, then when the allies back away at the last minute, it's not their fault. You just kind of didn't understand where they're coming from, and so that's a really key distinction there. That partners and allies, and of course, we want more partners than anything else. So the other groups, really quickly, just to get into them, one is the opposition, the people that oppose the change you're trying to create. And they're not bad people. They just have something that they're not willing to give up. What is that loss? We talked about in a prior episode again, that people don't resist the change per se. They're resisting loss. So what is that loss? Do you have some empathy? Do you understand that? Can you pace that loss? There are some people who can't make it. They're not going to make it to the finish line. Maybe they're going to lose their job. And we call them casualties. It's an intentionally provocative word because that's what it feels like when people have to be left behind. And I don't think anyone should be. I think anyone can change and does change. But at the same time, if you're running an organization or a project, sometimes you don't have the time or the resources to bring everybody along. So we want to treat them well, ethically, because they deserve it, but also strategically, if I'm honest, because if you don't treat them well at the door, good luck getting the people that are left behind to sign up with, for your change initiative. And then, very lastly, the last two stakeholder groups. One is, we call them troublemakers. They're actually not troublemakers, but they feel like it because they're the ones that ask the honest questions, the hard questions. They don't let you escape with easy answers. They're often the people that, they're the canaries in the coal mine, the leadership canaries in the coal mine. They see the need to change before anyone else. Like the people who were screaming about climate change for the last 40 years, But when they come up and they show up in meetings or at protests, people call them troublemakers, which is too bad, but that's what it feels like. So we need to understand who are the people that seem to be causing trouble, and can we partner with them? Right? Can we understand where they're coming from? And frankly, help them not marginalize themselves, because when you're the only person speaking a truth, it's easier for people to take you out, than really face your issue. And then the last group is yourself. And we'll talk more about yourself as a stakeholder. But oftentimes people get confused. They think that they're so passionate about something that they just kind of get sucked right in the middle, either with flattery or attack. And so, really kind of looking at yourself as your own stakeholder group and how you manage your own needs is an important part of leadership. So that's kind of a double click on, this idea of thinking politically. And it's the small p politics. It's not the big P politics of right, left, a Democrat, Republican, but the politics of human affairs.
And so on thinking politically, so it sounds like you're implying that it has to do with relating to the 6 key relationships and how we are micromanaging or thinking about our relationships with these people. But is there more thought and deeper consideration of other aspects, either in organization and communication as well, for thinking politically?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example right now. It's in the newspaper this week as you and I are filming here, and that's the whole Keystone pipeline situation. Now, personally, I mean, I think probably like many folks on this call or listening to this video, thrilled that Keystone is finally going to be killed off. It took way too long. And if you don't know what Keystone is, look it up. It's been around for about 10 years now. A big kind of, debate, political and otherwise. Mm-hmm. And, the way people who have been fighting against Keystone tend to frame it, there's many different ways. There's environmental considerations, but they also say, well, these jobs are only temporary anyway, because often the attack is that it's about, people are going to lose jobs. And that's not a fair attack, but it works, right? So we say, well, but they're only temporary jobs. And what we're really missing there is that what these people value, the construction workers in particular, is stability. they know it's a temporary job. All construction jobs are temporary jobs. That falls on flat ears when you say that. Like, it makes you sound ignorant in their ears. What they care about is not the job; it's the stability. It's finding that next job.
Mhm.
And I think what the Biden administration is doing really well, and Kamala Harris is they're speaking to that value that people hold for stability. Can we help them find the next job? It's not just about job placement or retraining. That's also has a role. So that's a very nuanced way that goes beyond just communication, not just about how we frame it, but how do we engage in that reality with people?
Mm.
We talked last time about coal miners, and my John Gensler in the book, how he had to understand the loyalty that people had to their heritage, to their grandparents who were also coal miners, who you are now walking in saying, you're a bunch of deplorables, or you've contributed to the destruction of this earth. Now that may be true, but again, you're not speaking their language. And even like places like Wyoming right now, again, losing coal jobs left to right, they're really proud. They're the coal engine of this country. So I'm not saying we should like feel bad for them necessarily. It's not about false equivalencies, but if you want to be effective to leading people, you need to understand these values and these loyalties and losses that are really in play for people, and not just think that leadership is a big sales job. Let me just sell you. And we say that language, right? I'm going to sell you on this idea. I'm going to convince you with data. And when we treat leadership like a marketing spiel, I think people can see right through it. We want to really get to that deeper level of understanding what it is they're really up against and what they're struggling with.
Mm. And so Kanitha, or correct me if I'm pronouncing her name incorrectly.
Kanitha.
Kanitha, thank you.
Yeah.
So Kanitha definitely plays a huge role in this part of your book. Like, she's mentioned in all the chapters. And could you go ahead and give us an example or introduce us to her and her story as being an LGBTQ plus rights activist and the struggles that she faced in this organization, especially with the 6 key relationships of the people she was working with?
Kanitha is an amazing woman. Kanitha Bigumsai is her name. She is she works. Let me describe the organization first. This is a hundreds of millions of dollar budget organization. It's a massive organization, 10, 12 million members, very complex worldwide. Their governing body alone is 1,000 people. If you can imagine that. If you thought your board meeting was a pain, imagine 1,000 people trying to make a decision, and they come together every 4 years. And I start with that because I'm going to tell you next that Kanitha is also a United Methodist Church minister. And so most people don't, when they think of these faith organizations, oftentimes they don't take them seriously as kind of executives, as people that are really trying to manage and lead complexity. In fact, it's actually much more complex in many ways than other organizations. Because if you're in a corporation, it's pretty clear what the bottom line, what success looks like. If you're in the work of the church, right? What does success look like? You're talking about people's hearts and minds and souls, right? So what I was fascinated by, first of all, just in working with the church, getting to know Kanitha, is the complexity of not just dealing with the bottom line numbers, which they also do have, but also the human element. And they have a very sophisticated understanding of what it takes to mobilize people. And the other thing that I thought was really fascinating about working in this particular church and in other faith communities as well is in leadership, we often talk about purpose. So we'll talk more about that next week, I think. We talk about creating a safe place, a holding environment, a container in which people can really have deeper questions. We talk about people connecting to their mission of the organization, right? Well, when it comes to this particular organization, Kanitha's organization, that's all there. I'm not saying they do it perfectly, but I was really curious as a student of change, how do you lead change? Wondering, okay, what kind of change is possible in an organization of this complexity that also has going for it this deep commitment to mission, where there's a real belief that this organization is not our own. It belongs to a higher power. Like, that is, you just think about that as a change and leadership geek, right? Like, wow, those are massive ingredients to have at your disposal to help people dig deeper into these losses and tough choices they need to face. So that's kind of, for me, that was part of the curiosity. And then I met Kanitha actually right after the 2016 election. She came to one of my public workshops in adaptive leadership. And, it was a week after the election, after Donald Trump got elected. And so a lot of kind of, soul searching we all had to do at that moment. And I think we kind of just bonded there and stayed in touch. So what she was trying to do, as you mentioned a moment ago, she was trying and is still trying to raise the visibility of LGBTQ people in the church as it pertains to things like ordainment and other issues. And again, we're talking about a complex organization, north of this country, south of this country, internationally, Philippines, Africa, very different value systems. So she had to really figure out, what are people really fearful of losing or giving up? What kind of relationships do they need to renegotiate, with their own people, in order to really take on board people who really, are leading a lifestyle that maybe is not something they not just agree with, but they're vehemently against. And so she traveled around the world. She met people, she listened to people, she pulled people together in small groups in kind of a community organizing type approach. And the upshot of all that, after much pain and trial and tribulation and failure, as she would talk about it, was the passing of a massive budget, hundreds of millions of dollars that's based in equity, more than it was in the past. But even more than that, and this is I think the part that's really encouraging, is that this mantle, this kind of this issue of what they call human sexuality, that's how they talk about it, the euphemism, but LGBTQ rights, has been taken up not just by the people you'd expect, people on the left, liberal, but centrists and even some people on the right who realize that while they may never agree, that the mission continues. That they're gonna still, the day after it all happens and changes are made, they're still gonna have to work together. And that's the essence, I think, of thinking politically. This idea of mobilizing people to tackle challenges that have no known or easy answers, and not just agreeing to disagree, which I think is a cop out, but recognizing we have to continue to engage. And frankly, in my own life with my own mother, this is an ongoing conversation around her beliefs and kind of the different places we enter the conversation around climate and the environment. So it's very real for me.
No, I can definitely relate on the conversation around climate and environment.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
I can't go home without us getting into that conversation, and it's
But so on the steps of engagement then, so what exactly are the steps of engagement for us to dive into a leadership moment? And my follow-up on that as well is, how are we able to really identify key stakeholders? Because it seems like when you analyze a leadership situation, the hardest part seems to be who is or what are the main stakeholders in the situation.
Yeah, and not just the loudest ones.
Yeah.
So the first step is really to diagnose, as I said, what is the work here, what is in play, and like for example, going back to I think last episode, and we talked about Vimal Kumar in India. There's a great example there where he was trying to get community engagement around education in the slums of India. And people were saying, well, gosh, why don't you just buy books and teach people? And he said, I could easily buy books. That's not the problem. But when people buy the books with their own hands and put them with their own hands into the shelves in the schools, then we know that, we're in their hearts and their minds. So really, diagnosing the work, it's not just about buying books, but it's really about engaging community in that case.
Mm.
So you think about your own challenge. What is it that you are trying to do? What is the adaptive part of that? Secondly is, who are these key stakeholders? And again, I find it's useful to look into these 4 or 5, 6 different categories. The one group I think is really important are the allies, and understanding who are the people that are kind of willing to take a risk to a certain point with you, but won't go all the way. And what would it take, for them to make this more a priority, or for you to change how you're going about this to include them? And partners are with you in it. Opposition, stay close to them because they have an important point of view. But I think the allies are really, really key. And then I think the next step here is really, how connected to your own sense of purpose are you? This is work, right? This is not just an email or a concept paper. You have to actually do some work, get to know people, spend time with people that don't agree with you, among other things. So why are you in this? What is your purpose for doing this? We'll talk more about that, I think, next week. And then lastly, and this is really maybe a thought I could leave folks with too, unless there's more conversation we want to have here, is what are your own values and loyalties and losses that are at risk? Oftentimes we think that we have the answer. We just need to sell people on it. But there's a possibility too that it will have to change. So what are you willing to sacrifice? Who are you willing to disappoint or have a different kind of conversation or relationship with so you can move forward? What might you have to, give up? And, I give you some examples from my own life on that to make it more real. But I think that kind of personal self-examination is really important if you're going to ask other people to do the same.
Mm. Yeah, my next question actually is, what practical things can we do? And it sounds like partially already answered, like just really take the time to sit down and think about what these values are. But are there any other practical things that we can do to really dive into and think about this type of leadership work?
Well, I think you're right, Kayla. It's, taking the time is probably the biggest thing. We have this metaphor in adaptive leadership that we call getting on the balcony, which is the idea of getting reflection in the midst of action. So if you can imagine the metaphor, like you're at a dance back when we used to dance together, before COVID, and you're kind of seeing the dance floor from afar. You're seeing who's dancing with whom. You're seeing who's dancing the wrong dance. Maybe you're seeing that the DJ's way too loud, so everyone's way over here. There's all these different things you see, which you don't see when you're in the day to day, and that putting out the fires in the action space. So the idea of getting on the balcony is an age-old idea of getting reflection in the midst of action. It's like if you played sports, you can kind of see the field, like Magic Johnson used to do back in the day. If people in the military talk about seeing through the fog of war, as a way to kind of get perspective. And I think, again, many traditions have this kind of notion of meditation, contemplation, just taking a long hot shower, doing a staff retreat, and there's many ways you can just kind of step back and just doing that for 5 minutes every day. I mean, it's a big ask to start off with, but that gives you the space to see the work clearly, to see the stakeholder, to see yourself in this. How are you getting in your own way, for example? And I think it's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, because organizations are really good at taking your time away from you. They're really bad at giving you time that nourishes you. So yeah, I would say getting on the balcony, that reflective time that you mentioned, is probably one of the biggest things you could do to begin this process of seeing critically and beginning to prepare yourself to lead change.
Mhm. And we are at our episode's time today, Eric, but thank you again so much for joining me. And can you go ahead and give us a small preview for next week's episode?
Yeah, so we're going to really get deep in the next week or two. I mean, so we've been talking so far about kind of the cases out there, other people leading change, and kind of more the intellectual, analytical part of leadership. And what I want to do, I think if we can do this together, is just really begin to explore those personal aspects of change. What is your own personal adaptive challenge? What might you be ready to let go of that's holding you back in your own leadership? What are your own biases? I mean, there's a lot that we can explore, because at the end of the day, the greatest tool you have is not a book or a framework, but it's yourself as the intervention in these systems and communities and family dynamics. So we're going to really take a deeper dive on that and look at questions of purpose and other things. We'll see where it takes us.
All the existential crisis thoughts beginning. What is my purpose?
Why am I here? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and roll through the end credits here and we'll be right back for our post-show segment.
Or academic,
Oh, no. Your answers were good. Like I was going through and we're back. So letting our hair down, I'll let my hair down for you.
Running joke.
Yeah. That's like every episode we're gonna crack this joke now. You like stroke the beard for me for thinking.
That's right.
Like
let it down.
Yeah, no, like I because like some of my questions you like answered like as you were going, I'm like, oh no, okay, like let's go ahead and elaborate on this more. So I was hoping that my kind of like off on the fly things were like were okay.
It's helpful. And there's so many, as I said to you before, like, it's so nuanced. There's so many directions we could take the conversation. There's really no wrong turn. It's like leadership too. When you're leading change, you get things thrown at you all the time, and you need to know how to work with that. And sometimes it's a distraction, sometimes it's not, but it's always about keeping the focus on the work that we're here to do. And for me, I really hope for people who are listening in and following this kind of narrative arc, that there's maybe at this point something can start in the bubble a little bit. Maybe a question that's forming, an inspiration even to take on that thing that I've been avoiding for so long. And I've been there. Like I think I mentioned in one episode, I don't remember, but I was a team meeting at year-end planning. This is about 8 years ago before I started my organization, and we were doing the same old stuff, and I just at some point said I can't do this anymore. We need to shift. And there's a coda to that which I can share, but it's these moments are everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. So when you started mentioning all the questions, I had this idea of like, oh, this could be like an activity where it's like, okay, leadership journal prompts with Eric, and then like maybe start like a simpatico post thing or like Twitter share or something, then have that be attached to like the book series. That'd be kind of interesting.
I tell you, I really,
But
when we first started talking, like the climate EDU, I mean, there's so much potential now to lead to really make a difference in the climate space with with the Biden administration. And my
oh yeah,
concern is that we're going to go technical. It's going to be the technical solutions that aren't going to be owned by the right people, that are going to replicate power, systems of power and privilege. And it's not guaranteed that it's going to happen, but I see a little bit of that happening right now. So I really do think this is a moment for leadership in the climate space and the environment as well. And there's a lot like we
Mhm.
haven't talked about. Just the idea of regenerative. We talk about regenerative agriculture, but regenerative
Yeah.
leadership. And the voices of the unheard. I mean, there's so much in the space right now that I think just needs fora like the one you guys are providing.
So what are you noticing with the technical solutions? Because I know there was the executive order on the 20th that ended the oil leases in the Arctic, and then the renewal for Keystone.
Hmm.
So are you saying that those are technical, or are you thinking of something different right now that's happening?
I mean, I had other things in mind, but we could, yeah, using those examples. I mean, those are very technical, authority driven
Mhm.
responses, and I'm not saying they're bad. Like, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad that the mining is no longer going to happen on public lands, and the Keystone is has been stopped. But what's to say in 4 years that's not going to come back? Or what's the next tar sands pipeline? And we know it's being built, right?
Mhm.
Because Canada's determined to get that money, or that oil to market. Um, you know, it's just that part of the conversation is easy to forget about. It's kind of like with immigration too. A different example than climate, but the border wall, obviously technical solution.
Mhm.
What I've loved about what the Biden administration is doing is they're engaging folks from where these countries, these people are coming, saying, "Can we help? What are the conditions that are creating um, this kind of mass migration?" I don't think just giving money to these people is the answer either, but at least it's going to the source of where these issues are emerging. And
Mhm.
that's really what I'm curious about. So the regenerative ag piece to me is really where it's really interesting. Can we really get farmers back on board, particularly smallholder farmers who have nothing but gain
Mhm.
to make from being engaged in a substantive way? And I think these kind of questions really have a lot of potential, which I don't see getting much attention. They're there, but we're kind of glomming on to the obvious stuff.
Yeah, no, I wonder where that conversation would even start, because I know. So our partner Toby, he's all in agriculture is his whole thing. And we had I forget the name of the policy. I know that there's some policy that's being worked on or is up for review right now. He's gonna kill me for
The Farm
forgetting.
Bill.
I think.
Yeah, that
Um,
was coming up in 2023.
okay. And they were mentioning, so that is currently still being worked on, right? So they're able to go and like inject more climate friendly practices and finances into that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Farm Bill, to me is a really good example of that. Rather than spending billions to euthanize cattle and destroy corn, let's use it to really create healthier soil, which is going to do wonders for the environment. I mean, healthy soil alone, that I mean, you can't overestimate the the effectiveness of soil restoration and also restoring the water cycle as part of that. Climate change in a way, what we call climate change, a lot of it you can actually trace back to soil erosion and disruption of the water cycle. Like for example, the Amazon. People say that the Amazon is the lungs of the world. It's actually not true. It's most of the oxygen doesn't find its way, but what it does is it's actually the powerhouse for the global water cycle. Um, and it's fascinating. You have these flying rivers that come in from the ocean into the Amazon that are being pulled in by transpiration, and these trees in the center of the continent like that. It's just amazing what's happening there. So when you disrupt that by cutting down by logging the forest, you get the conditions that we call climate change. And so there's just again the diagnosis of the problem I think has so much more nuance than what we get into, because it's not politically expedient to talk about complex scientific ecosystem type things.
Yeah. I mean, a fascinating thing, like on the topic of the Amazon, was California's whole, so Southern California for sure. I'm not sure about Northern California, but we rely heavily on rains coming up from the Amazon or the moisture coming up. And so once you go and look back on like the rate of deforestation and like also California's drought.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh wow, that's some heavy information there, sirs.
Right. And what do you do with that? If I'm a client, if I'm a clean energy exec, what do I do with that information?
Yeah.
Do I just ignore it and say, well, we have to put up more arrays, more megawatts? Like, I'm not saying I love clean energy, it's not bad, but it's like if you have the clout, if you have the clout now, you're now a person in power and authority. You can now marshal resources. Do you ignore that data point because it doesn't fit into your business model, or do you somehow incorporate that? And that's what I admire about places like Patagonia. I really do. I mean, you can tell I wear the shirt all the time, but it just, I really do. I want to get behind brands that I believe in, and that's one of the few that I really do believe in because they get this at a science level, they get it at a business level, they get it at the heart level, and they're trying to do something about that, which is bold and courageous. And I just want to see more of that kind of leadership in the world. Yeah.
Well, I think by having more of these conversations, and like I've been telling a lot of my friends, just even in environmental activist communities or like my content creator communities about your book, because I'm actually rereading it again just for fun for myself at this point. And I think, especially with everything going on, there's definitely conversation being had about how can we make change. Because a lot of the, I guess, if I'm using it correctly, are solutions from like leading officials have been very technical, but we really need more adaptive leadership and change in a like for the variety of communities, right? Like our needs here in California are a lot different than the needs of everyone who was affected by the derecho last year. In Iowa, or yes, that was Iowa, not Ohio, or was it Ohio? Blonde moment. um, and so I think there is hope, like that there is more conversation happening about adaptive change and leadership for sure.
I really hope so, and I really hope that we can, when we start, um, as I say, defining the work, the tap the work appropriately, we begin to realize that we can't solve these things alone. That our way of thinking about leadership is actually part of the problem. So, when you begin to look at, say, the health of the Amazon, just as an example, or if you begin to look at solutions like traditional ecological knowledge, native communities, indigenous communities around the world have known how to live in harmony with the world. I'm not saying let's go back to, the way things were 1,000 years ago, but there's a wisdom there, a deep wisdom. So where do we let that leadership in? Right? And I say let in because there's a gatekeeping role here that people tend to play in power and privilege. So these answers are not as far away as they seem, but it requires people being willing to give up some power and control and step into the unknown and really learning to live and love at the edge of their incompetence, so that we can bring in and really have a humility to hear the voices of people that have been maybe knocking at the door for a long time. And so I think that's another thing that's maybe happening now with some of the changes in this country. But I think a lot more of that has to happen if we're really going to get to a place where we get the sustainable solutions. So yeah, so that idea of what am I willing to give up in terms of my own power, my own, like that's really what the next couple episodes I think touch on in a very light way, and I think that's a critical part of getting to these sustainable solutions. So I'm really glad to hear you're having those conversations with people, and of course always willing to support you in that.
No, and I'm really looking forward to these next two episodes to get into the harder existential questions, but they are absolutely necessary.
In 22 minutes or less.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have like the post show. We can go ahead and like just keep going. Be like, all right, so if good clips, try to like mush it in there, but
yeah.
we'll make it work. I'm sure.
I'm sure we're recording these. We can put these out there as a separate thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do have them. They're just not part of like the official.
Oh, is that right?
Like VOD, yeah. So I mean, if you want like the post show segments, because it's just like casual conversation, so it's not really like the fancy produced stuff. Yeah. But if you want like our chit chats, I can totally like send those your way.
No, I love the chit chats as much as I love the live piece. So yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead and let my video team know and be like, hey, please send.
That'd be great. Yeah, and let's keep thinking about how to keep this conversation going, and with us, but also with others who hopefully are seeing maybe some possibility for them to engage in this work.
Yeah. I definitely am looking forward. So I've been playing around with the idea of panels with you, and I was even thinking you might vibe pretty well with Jeff Slegelmilch. I had him on for Rethinking Readiness. His book is about so different disaster scenarios. So like it's like critical infrastructure failure, cybersecurity. I think nuclear was also in there. Yes. Climate change, obviously. Um, and just how we can better prepare and think about these things. And I feel like you two would have a wonderful conversation just from like your stance on adaptive leadership and then his stance on like, yeah, we really need to rethink how we are dealing with disasters. Because right now the planning is just disaster happens, we're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, go send resources in, and then it just keeps on happening. Like I think John Kerry actually mentioned this yesterday in his speech about how we're already spending all this money on climate just from like the hurricanes last year,
Yeah.
where we can just repurpose that money to preventative measures and equity so that doesn't happen.
Right. Oh, that's
Um,
great.
yeah, so I feel like you two would like vibe really well from your stance and then his information in disaster
Yeah.
relief. But
I'm happy to talk with him.
okay, well, I'll go ahead and wrap this up here, and yeah, I'll make sure to go ahead and send you the actual VOD, and I'll see if I can put in a zip file all of our previous chats, so I'll get access to those. So
That sounds great, Kayla. Thanks as always for all the work you're putting into this.
no, and thank you for taking time out of like your busy day. I mean, especially today being a busy day. Thank you.
I look forward to these calls.
Great. Well, have a wonderful rest of your evening, Eric, and I'll email you and chat with you next week.
Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Good night.
All right, lovelies. Thank you so much for tuning in once again to Climate EDU. Eric will be joining us again next week to cover part. I'm losing track of our parts now. But part five of his book, yes, we'll be getting into like the nitty gritty about loss and what we need to give up in order to really participate in leadership moments. It's will be a brilliant conversation, and it's a lot of things that people really should be thinking about when stepping into leadership roles. And I think this is our last episode for today. So we look forward to seeing you again next week and catch y'all later.